Final Fantasy XIII was designed primarily for the PlayStation 3, but it also arrived on Xbox 360 and eventually the PC. It even supports backwards compatibility mode on modern Xbox consoles, further enhancing the experience, something I've covered in the past. When examining each version, there's basically three key areas of differentiation between them: resolution, frame rate, and full motion video quality. Now, resolution-wise, the PlayStation 3 version runs at 1280 by 720, but supports upscaling to 1080p, something which does have actual benefits when it comes to its full motion video playback, which we'll discuss momentarily. Xbox 360, on the other hand, operates at just 1024 by 576. Both utilize 2x MSAA, but I wonder if the developers were relying on tiling with the 360 version, resulting in this lower resolution, though in that case you'd think 4x MSAA would have been possible. It's a curious difference when you consider the strengths of the Xbox 360's GPU. It does kind of suggest that this game was created on a much shorter timescale for Xbox. PS3 certainly offers superior image quality overall, with cleaner edges and superior hair coverage, but it certainly looks nice enough on the 360, even at this lower resolution. Where it differs most significantly, though, is in the FMV quality. Final Fantasy XIII relies very heavily on video clips, and on PlayStation 3, there's no issue here. Square uses very high bitrate videos throughout the game, no doubt made possible thanks to the Blu-ray format. Even better, all of the pre-rendered CGI sequences are displayed at Full HD 1080p, which look phenomenal. But for some reason, when porting the game to Xbox 360, rather than using a higher quality H.264 based codec or something like that, they opted instead to recompress everything using Bink Video, and oh boy, is the quality low. Let's cue up a comparison here during the introduction movie. I'll pause the action for a second. If we then zoom the camera here into this shot, you should notice some additional macro blocking and loss of clarity on the Xbox 360 side as a result of the low bitrate. Given that it ships on 3 discs on Xbox 360, it's obvious that space was a real issue, but I think they could have done a better job with video compression here. As it stands, given the amount of video in the game, it's kind of a problem for the overall presentation. Frame rate wise, both target 30 frames per second, but dips in performance very significantly between the two platforms, suggesting very different bottlenecks. GPU-heavy real-time cutscenes, for instance, seem to push the PlayStation 3 over the edge, with frame drops often appearing during character close-ups specifically. Xbox 360, on the other hand, fares a lot better in this regard, maintaining the target 30 frames per second with relative ease. While playing through Final Fantasy XIII, you'll spend a decent amount of time watching these cutscenes, and whenever a real-time sequence is used, you can be sure that slowdown will be more common and apparent on the PlayStation 3. Given the state of frame rates during this era, though, I'd say it's not that distracting, but it is definitely an advantage in favor of 360. Fortunately, when playing, performance is a lot more consistent across both platforms. Battles play out smoothly at 30 frames per second, or at least as smooth as 30 frames per second can be, with only an occasional hint of slowdown like this scene here on the Xbox 360. Again though, the PS3 60 generation is so well known for low frame rates that the stability here is kind of impressive given the quality of the graphics on display. Outside of higher end first party projects, such fluidity was often not observed. Furthermore, as we'll see later in the video, the original Final Fantasy XIII is easily the most stable of the trilogy, neatly dodging any real nasty slowdown like we see in those games. That is, with one major exception. While the game generally seems to perform slightly better on Xbox 360 throughout most of the game, once you arrive on Grand Pulse, the result is reversed. Suddenly, just running across the open landscape is enough to trigger dips into the mid-20s on the Xbox, whereas the PS3 hums along without issue, delivering a stable 30 frames per second. I'm really not entirely sure where the bottleneck on 360 lies. After all, it's not like there's much happening on the screen. It is larger than anything else in the game, but ultimately pretty sparse. Either way, it's the one area where the PS Triple comes out ahead performance-wise. Looking at both versions, I'd have to give the PS3 version the overall advantage. It looks slightly better, features much better FMV, and runs well enough, I'd say. It's pretty obvious that this is the version that Square poured most of its time and money into. But there are other options available today. Firstly, there's the backwards compatibility feature on modern Xbox consoles. I discussed this in a proper video in great detail in the past, but the gist here is simple. Final Fantasy XIII receives multiple improvements that differ based on which Xbox you're using, but it elevates all of them. So on Xbox One X or the Xbox Series X, the internal resolution is boosted significantly from 576p all the way up to 3072 by 1728. Of course, the video you're watching right now is rendered just at 1080p, so you won't see all of the pixels, but the downsampling benefits should be plainly obvious. It's much cleaner than any original version of the game. It also runs better with all of the performance hiccups completely eliminated. It's now a completely steady 30 frames per second throughout. And yes, this includes all of the areas on Grand Pulse, which struggled to run well on Xbox 360, but deliver a perfect 30 frames per second and much sharper visuals on the Series X here. This is definitely a much better experience all around. If you're on Xbox Series S then, you get a 2x increase on each axis, bringing it up to 2048 by 1152, which is a lot sharper. Xbox One and Xbox One S then run at the original 576p, but receive improved performance like all the others. The most significant improvement, though, I might argue, stems from the FMV sequences, which were re-encoded at a much higher quality. They're still using Bink Video, of course, and not quite a match for PS3, but they're very close now, and it's no longer a real issue. Unfortunately, FF13 never received support for an increased frame rate like the sequels did, so you're stuck at 30 frames per second. But still, with these improvements, it's basically the best way to enjoy the game on a modern platform. Then of course we have the PC version. Released several years later, the PC release is widely considered a mediocre port, but there are ways to massively improve it in the modern era. So by default, the game runs with a double buffer VSync, meaning if you can't hold 60 FPS, your frame rate will drop all the way back to 30 instead. At the time, tools were available to overcome this of course, but they also created problems with cutscene playback. Thankfully, it's now 2022, and using more modern, powerful PCs, it's pretty easy to just blitz right through this and enjoy the game at a stable 60 frames per second. In fact, it's the only way to play Final Fantasy XIII above 30 FPS. The only downside to this is that it creates an unfortunate contrast between the pre-rendered movie scenes and the gameplay. The videos are 30 FPS obviously, and lower resolution, while the gameplay can run at 60 FPS instead. Still, I think it's worth enjoying it at the higher frame rate. It also features higher resolution shadows, and you can force 16x AF from your GPU control panel too, something the Xbox versions enjoy as well. Honestly, playing it on a modern PC, it feels excellent. There are occasional minor visual bugs of course, such as the Z fighting evident in certain scenes like this, but by and large, it looks great and is super sharp. It's really a joy seeing the game run at a smooth 60 frames per second, especially in the beautifully directed real-time cutscenes. Plus, that higher resolution and high levels of anisotropic filtering certainly help in areas like this, which can appear otherwise muddy, I think. Compared to the PlayStation 3 original, I think you can appreciate the improvements on offer here. Everything is sharper, cleaner, and runs smoother, just as you'd expect from a PC release, though in reality it looks very similar to the backwards compatible enhanced Xbox version, just at a higher frame rate. In fact, the only real problem here is that by default the FMV quality is very poor, much like the 360 original. But this is the PC, my friends, not a console, which opens the door for mods. Want higher quality FMV? You can do it. Want to improve those visuals or modify the gameplay? Yep, of course it's possible. One of my favorite mods is this one, the HD Models Plus. This updates the game to use the highest quality character models throughout the entire game. That means both in cutscenes and gameplay. It looks dramatically better, I think, with a much higher polygon count. So let's compare, shall we? Now at first glance, it may not actually seem like a huge difference. I mean, yes, if you look carefully, you should spot the extra detail in each of these scenes, and it looks perceptually great, right? But it's only when you pause the action that you really can appreciate those extra details, so check it out. The difference in detail here is simply astounding. Increased polygon counts, improved textures, and higher quality hair rendering are all included here on these main characters. Let's check out another scene then. The same improvements are clear as day, aren't they? It actually feels completely authentic and natural in action as well. Of course, this only applies to the main characters, not secondary or tertiary characters, but still, I think it's pretty awesome. There's an even more robust HD pack available as well if you like, which further alters the game. The point is, the PC version looks fantastic and is probably the single best version of Final Fantasy XIII if you have a decent PC and some of these mods installed. The only real downside remaining here is some weird technical hiccups. 1440p scaling seems completely messed up, FMV playback is not as smooth as it should be, and it's very light on options. Otherwise, it's darn good, provided your PC is up to the task of course. Another version of the game was also released on the Windows Store though, and there was talk about it being improved through the porting company Virtuous. But from what I can tell, it still shares most of the issues with the Steam version and you can't use mods with it, making it kind of a poor choice in the grand scheme of things. That, however, is pretty much what you can expect across the various versions of Final Fantasy XIII, but whichever version you play, I think it's pretty clear that the game holds up exceptionally well. Ultimately, what I love about 13's presentation is its highly coherent and polished appearance. Lacking things such as screen space artifacts, temporal instability, or other modern nitpicks, Final Fantasy XIII almost feels like a fusion between these old and new rendering techniques polished up to perfection. It holds up a lot better than most other games released during this period.